All right, well, folks, we are here at Sparlösa, at the Sparlösa Runestone, one of the world's most mysterious, I think.
Yes, it is.
With Emeritus Professor Henrik Williams of the University of Uppsala. Once again, it's a pleasure and an honor to have you back, sir.
Oh, it's fun. Thank you.
So, what on earth are we looking at? Did aliens carve this?
I think that's a very good theory, actually, because it's just so mysterious. And it's one of the very few stones that I really can't go up to and say, this is what it says and this is how you interpret it. Even though I'm hesitant to claim it's probably even more difficult than the Runestone, because that at least is undamaged. And this one, as you will see, has sustained pretty much damage. And that makes things even more complicated. Also, it has runes taken from different types of futharks. It has very strange contents, whatever they're about. There are all these, and you will see, what is this guy? You know, they're saying we'll see more of that, and that, of course, is in great contrast with the Runestone that doesn't have any pictures at all. Mm-hmm. And then we're pretty sure this is carved around the year 800, so it would be early Viking Age, just like the Runestone. And then what is fascinating, somebody comes along like 250 years later and carves this part that they haven't painted now and says Gisli made in memory of his brother Gunnar this monument, which is an absolute lie, you know. But it's sort of neat that that's what they claim to. And you can see that it's much later language and runes too, so they'd be 1050s or so. Do you want me to try to tell you a little bit about the contents?
Yeah. Whatever you can say about it. I mean, in the lead up to this, we decided that, well, I couldn't come to Sweden without looking at a runestone with you. And you suggested this one, and it's a wonderful suggestion, and you sent me a great deal of literature about this. And I read, in addition to the ones you sent me, probably 14 or 15 articles and books about this stone. And nobody agrees on what it says.
No.
There are a few words.
Yeah.
Like we know a few names that are on this, but no one agrees about the details. So what do you see?
I'm going to get rid of some of the names too.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah.
Well, what I'm doing now is that I will be referring to a translation, an unpublished translation by a colleague of mine, Professor Emeritus Staffan Fridell at Uppsala University, who has written an extensive article on this stone, and he has proposed what I consider being the least improbable interpretation. And parts of it I think are really good, and he's found a consistent topic, which is something that most others have failed to do, because there's got to be a reason why you commission something like this or you carve something like this. It's obviously one of a kind. These are the biggest runes ever in the world. This one is like 1.5 feet. And it has very strange, these signs here. What are those? We're going to get into that. But the stone itself doesn't have much of a history. It's known from the 17th century, and then it was built into the nearby church. And you can only see this side and part of that. And it's been split down the middle. And then it was taken out, I think, in 1939 or 1940. And then they saw that it was actually carved on all sides, just like the Runestone. And ever since, people have been trying to interpret it, more or less successfully, I would say less. But we're pretty in agreement, at least about one thing, in that this side it starts off with a name. And the name is Ajuls. And that is a form of the name Eyvisl in Old Icelandic, and this is sort of a pet form, and this name reoccurs in the stone in its full form, Eyvisl. So Eyvisl or Ajuls, and then it says Gav, which means gave, that's quite certain, and then it says Eirikis, and repeating the S, Sunur, the son of Eric, and then according to the new interpretation, we will have stop there. And then it'll start off with a new name, which is this one here. And it says Alriker. And Gav. So you have two people, Eivissel and Alriker. And the Eirik part, which everybody previously has interpreted as Eric. Eric in itself has a meaning. The etymology of it is Einarikias, the one who rules alone. And according to Staffan Fridell, it is not the name here, but it's actually the word,
Okay.
the eternal ruler. So, and that makes a little bit more sense. So what is it that this Eyjuls has given? And the whole giving concept is as you know, steeply, it's deeply admired in religion. And we have the Stentoftenstone, which is a couple of centuries earlier in the southeastern part of Sweden, where they give a good year. And a good year, it's not the blimp.
Right.
No, it's a fruitful, fertile year.
Right. And the Yara rune being used for
Exactly.
the word, yeah.
And Staffan Fridell's idea is that why would they have these markers here? Why would they separate in the middle of the diphthong, A, which is stupid? He says that what you're supposed to do, this is done so that you repeat the reading of the A rune and have it twice. So it actually starts with Ara, or Ar, which is the year. So again, a good year, Eyjuls gave.
I see.
Eyjuls gave a good year. And it's intriguing, and it has a high, I suppose, likelihood that that could be it, because that would explain why you do this.
Okay. Very interesting use of what these markers are.
Yeah.
My question about this is object, subject, verb. That's an unusual word order.
Extremely unusual. And but it's just because things are rare don't mean that they're
Sure.
impossible.
Can you think of any other cases of contemporary artifacts with object, subject, verb?
I think there are those, but I can't off the top of my head mention one. But I say it doesn't render the interpretation impossible.
No, certainly.
And since this is probably some kind of ritualistic language, and you know, in verse and poetry, word order can be whatever it is. So he gave them, he must be a person in some kind of position where he can grant a fertile good year. And he's then the son of the eternal ruler, and who's that? That has to be the title of a king. And the king's name would then be Alriker. And he also gave. So that's those two people, Eyjuls and Alriker, they are in a position where they can grant. They would be the Godi, the local chieftain and priest or cultic leader, whatever you would call him, at the same time. So that much is at least probable and not too difficult. And as you see, most of these things are undamaged enough so we can read them. There's been a great discussion whether these are runes or not, but Staffan Fridell thinks that they're just ornaments, and I agree. I don't think these are runes, so it ends up with a U rune up here. So that's pretty much the front part of the stone.
And did you mention the U rune here is being used as if it were an U?
Well, if you want to go into that, yes.
Okay.
You would expect, since this is subject, it would be Alriker with this palatal R sound, which was written with this special rune, the U rune. And that's what you would expect here. Now, this is a U rune, and it has had many different explanations because it should stand for the same sound as this one. And I'm not even sure it's a U rune, and I cannot accept any of the explanations why you would be using a U rune instead of the U rune. Some people say that the name of the U rune was Yr, and therefore this person could use the beginning of the designation for the rune, the Y, instead of the R. And the Y would be written with a U, right? So they would write it with the U rune instead. But that doesn't work here because in this part of Sweden, it's not the Y rune that's in Norway and in Iceland. This would rather be the Ir rune with an I sound. So that explanation doesn't really cover it.
And you also, speaking of unusual forms, we have this R you were pointing out to me is without a stave.
Yeah, this first of all is a very old form of the A rune, right? It's the Yara rune simplified with the cross, and in later inscriptions, this is actually the H rune, but here it's the A rune. But they also use the normal A rune, And then it's a strange looking L rune, which is the short twig version. And then, probably because they didn't have enough space, they use, and they do that again on the back side of the stone, an R rune without, this is supposed to be the twig.
Yeah.
Because it's followed by the I rune, which is straighter. So this is just the crook, or whatever you'd call it, of the R rune. Even though they have used an R rune before and will do so again.
If you had not pointed that out to me, it would have taken me a long time to guess that.
If I hadn't read up on this, it would have taken me a long time too.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And
any thoughts on these?
there have been discussions of these. According to the translation I give you now, there's no reason to make a syntactic limit right here. It's, it's sort of a comma, right? So Eil's gave, and then after the gave part, that's K-A-F. So that stops there. And then they define him in some way, the son of the eternal ruler. And then you would expect a new little thingy here, but obviously he ran out of space. It's not too well planned.
No, that's true. Yeah, the first thing I thought of when I saw these were thinking of like Yashberry, which we were just talking about, has a K like that. And Elderfruit there, but that makes no sense.
You would have two Ks then.
Yeah, and a G.
Yeah.
It makes no sense. All right, let's look at the next side. All right, now we are looking on the opposite side.
The B side, why they would go to the back side, I don't know, but that's what people usually say. And this is all damaged, so it's quite difficult to make out exactly. But up here, according to the most recent interpretation, it says something about giving ull at Gjaldi, and meaning in return. And ull is the old Gothic word wulthus, meaning glory.
Like the god Uller too.
Yeah. And the guess then would be that the two kings, Eil's and his father Alrike, they have given good years, and the people then give glory in return. They show reverence or whatever. But as you see, these are quite heavily damaged, and it all depends on what it says originally here. And also, to get this give ull in return, you need to the Lord. This would be the word frau, or frøy, or frey in Old West Norse, and which is, of course, the name of a god, Freyr. But here it would again just be a word to the Lord. And knowing Old Norse as you do, you would expect a dative I here. But this does seem to vary. Same thing on the runestone from Røk, and perhaps it's not necessary. The word reoccurs in this interpretation once more. But again, you would then have to read this U rune twice. First frøy and then ull. But we know that does occur also again on the Røk runestone.
Let me ask, Grønvik suggested that this is a diminutive to the name of the god Frøy, Frøyla.
Yeah.
Something like that, similar to a Gothic diminutive like Attila, Wolfila.
Exactly, Frøyli then in the nominative.
What do you think of that?
Well, Grønvik is very fond of coming up with new forms. And basically, he's very good at criticizing other people's interpretations. Very credible. He was extremely knowledgeable. Wonderful man. 2 nice dogs, too. But when he comes up with his own interpretations, he's quite wild. And I wouldn't go for that unless you could really tie it into a consistent, very convincing interpretation. I don't think his is. I think this one is better.
The strength of what you're telling me here is that it ties the different sides together. Exactly. Which is a huge strength to the Rook presentation that you made, right? I mean, otherwise Rook becomes 20 different messages, right? But this is, I just wanted to check on that, as that was one of the most standout things about his interpretation. Yeah. He also read something like the Gothic word till, good, here.
Yeah. It's possible, of course. His interpretation does have the advantage of not having to read the U-rune twice. And the Frauli thing in itself is not incredible. This is not attested before. So on the other hand, I'm not sure that you have the word Freyr used as an appellative in Old Norse. It's only a name, isn't it?
It is only a name.
Yeah. And the same thing, of course, goes with Eirike. That's only a name as far as we know. But this stone, being that old, makes it more credible. Then we have two further lines that are, and I should point out that the stone has actually been carved by two people, because they've done a 3D scan by laser and can see the grooves look different according to how you hold the chisel.
Oh, I understand.
And that is Laila Kitzler-Åfeldt, who's made a specialty of this. The strange thing is then you would expect carver 1 to use one set of runes and carver 2 another set of runes. Nah, they mix it. Then this one is very exciting for us from Uppsala, because actually it says quite clearly here, it says F-A ed I j. So it will be fadir, father. That's quite clear. And it says U B S A L, Uppsala. And here you may very well have you do have an A S and an A, and then this could very well have been a T rune. So it would then be the father sat Uppsala. Again, you would expect an I rune here, Uppsala, because he would be sitting in Uppsala. And Uppsala is a plural, so it would be Uppsalum. But we do have one record from Snorre Sturluson where he actually mentions the Uppsala as a singular.
Okay.
Uppsala, the hall in Uppsala, the great feasting hall. And also this could be a locative without an I stem, without the ending. So I kind of like that. But on the other hand, that's because I'm from Uppsala, or work there at least.
Sure, but it's hard. I think the interpretations that leave out or try to read that as sat.
Yeah.
It's hard not to read that as something to do with Uppsala.
Yeah, the alternative is to read it as sal, around the hall, which of course is possible too. The strange thing is that after it says fadir Uppsal, it says fadir again. And then swath, so that, and then something that we can't read. And I can't think of a reason why you would repeat the word fadir twice. But again, and I don't think that Staffan Fridell has a complete, he doesn't interpret the whole thing, because he recognizes there are too many damaged parts too.
My first thought is, on the other side, it says Gav 2 times.
Yes.
So these two carvers may have a propensity for repeating themselves for some reason.
That could very well be. And I think that this could eventually be worked out. And I think that whatever the interpretation of Staffan Fridell is, it's a great leap forward, and it's something to build on. And that's how runology should work, right? Then we have something, this part here is probably uninterpreted. It's probably says Omas, the Os rune standing for nasal A, M. And this is the older type M, right? AS. And then N, the Os rune again, TU. And that has been translated as netter or nightur, nights. And again, you would use the U rune for the palatal R.
Very strange.
And then AUK, auk, and TAKA, palatal R, dagar, days, nights and days. And how you got to fit that into Staffan Fridell thinks that, well, they do it all the time. But I'm not convinced. Nights and days sounds wonderful, but wouldn't you say days and nights?
A little more frequent, probably, in most languages.
Yeah. And I think that, can you remember what Grönwig does? It's not nights, is it?
It's not, no. He's one of the people who reads that as something completely different.
Yeah.
Although there were some other people who did too.
But the nice thing about him is that he actually reads what it says, and he doesn't change the readings. And then for that, I respected him. And then it's word, this is an A rune. That looks like an S, short twig S. L, this is the R rune again, without a main staff. I, K, and U. So Alrikur, but it looks like it's Aselrikur. But here the explanation may be that they carve the main staff first and then the other main staffs. And when they start on this one, they realize it's going to be too narrow. So they're just going to skip that. It's difficult to erase stuff in stone, so they just don't paint it in, I suppose. And then it says it's a by name. and various other things here that I'm not going to go into because it's just too difficult to make heads or tails out of.
All right. What do we see up here? Any?
Well, I'm not sure. Is this another head? Or is this some kind of ornament? It looks like a hat and eyes or something and a beard. But again, this is really bad that this part is missing.
Yeah, I wonder if it once had a face at the bottom on the one side and a face on the top on this side. That's what it
Neat
looks
idea.
like.
But of course, just as you see, the bottom here is gone too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my wife always asks me if I don't want to go back with a time machine, because then, of course, I could get answers for all my questions in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And I always say, what would be the fun in that?
Right,
I mean,
right.
it's the mystery.
Sure.
But in this case, I wouldn't mind being there, seeing the stone undamaged.
If you could ask the carvers one question about it, what would you ask?
What did it look like originally?
Yeah, sure.
Because then I have all the exciting challenge of it, interpreting it, but I would know what I had to do with.
Sure.
Yeah. So I would just, take my phone back.
Yeah, right. Take
1,200 years.
Four pictures?
4 pictures and then rush back.
Yeah. Well, this lack, it's just impossible to read what was there.
Yeah. Here, this part is obviously fallen off. You can see that quite clearly. And we're going to see that later, but there's a row of runes up here. Do they continue or not? That's going to change the interpretation if they did. If it's complete, it's completely different.
Folks, we'll be right back to looking at the Sparlösa runestone, one of the weirdest and hardest to reach runestones. It's really kind of in the middle of nowhere. First, I want to thank the people that made this possible. Henrik for making the trip, because it was also a long trip for him. Grimfrost for bringing us to Sweden to do that and also talk to Birka and appear on their podcast. My episode will be August 1st. Check that out with Johan Hegg. And then I also really want to thank my Patreon supporters, 7 of which we met today here in Stockholm. Those are the people that make this possible. Grimfrost make wonderful Viking stuff, and you can also get my books from them. Of course, my Patreon supporters really pay the bill, so thanks all of you. And now back to the Sparlösa runestone.
So we're now on the C side, even though this is just left of the front side. And I would have preferred to read it like that, but that's not what people do. We don't know how far down it went, but we have the complete word here, runar, runes. And then it says thar, again, with this strange looking R rune, which just looks like an I rune. So the runes, and then this famous word, ragi nu, probably, kundu, or kudu. So it's how would you translate that, Jackson? You did that.
Of divine origin?
Of divine origin, yes. And then Staffan Fridell reuses the U rune together with the I rune and the next U rune to work up a word wiu, which would mean holy. So the holy runes of divine origin. And then again, thar, swad, so that, those that, so that, or there, so that, and then aliriku, again, alrik, with an unexplained I rune in the middle here, but I think that's just epenthetic, aliriku, if you pronounce that. And then again, the U rune instead of the expected U rune, and then L, U, B, U, and that would be luvu, or luvu, which is his interpretation now of a byname, a nickname for Alrika. So it would have something to do with luv in Old Icelandic, meaning healing. So the healer, something like that. And then F, A, thorn, and an I up here, fadi, which originally means painted, but very early on came to, because they probably did paint runes, but now it just means carved. It's an old verb for carving. So he has carved these holy runes stemming from the gods. So it's sort of a carver's formula, and perhaps that's why they want the entire inscription to end with this. It's sort of a signature. And
we should mention, for those interested in comparing to other Old Norse literature, this word raginakundu in Old Icelandic reginkunnigur. occurs in describing runes in Havamal. Havamal stanza 80, it says the runes of divine origin. And then in Hamdismal, the very end of the Poetic Edda, it looks like Jormunrekkr is the one called the one of divine origin who shouts that his Goths should stone Hamdir and Sorli. Although it could also be Odin shouting it. It's Odin in Volsunga Saga.
Yes, and we would like to find Odin here if we could. So
Yeah,
let's
sure.
get back to that. It starts off actually here, so I should have started on this part. Because here it says aft, which means after or in memory of. And then a whistle. So this is the full form. A whistle.
Mm-hmm.
And then it says uk rav, and read or interpret the holy runes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So this is accusative. Here.
Yeah. So it's in memory of a whistle, and read the holy runes stemming from the gods that Alrikr carved. So for once we have undamaged runes, and then of course it's much easier to interpret, but even so there are difficulties with some of the solutions that they made. And do we read the U-rune twice here or not? But at least it would give this meaning, which other interpreters have failed to do.
Well, and taking one rune 2 times, I mean, you have to in so many stones.
Yes, you do.
So there's,
But you can only reuse it once.
yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. We can make it 3 words.
Yeah. And then, of course, we start with the pictures. And some people have interpreted this as a goose. And we just heard that perhaps the goose has a broken heart.
That's Lauren's notion.
Yes, her contribution. And they have identified this as an owl. And of course, this looks like a wing. And that could be the talons, I suppose. And then you have a snake down here. What these things, do they fight? Or they seem more entangled than fighting. And owls and geese really don't make much of an appearance in Old Norse religion, do they?
No, I can't think of it. The only thing that even strikes my mind at first, because we were just talking about Hamdismal, is the name Svanhildur.
Yeah.
And what does that get you? So,
It's always possible that pictures of animals could stand for people. But it needs to be fitted into the rest of the interpretation, and I can't do it, and Staff of Fridell hasn't tried to. Then this side has an inscription up here, and I'm not going to go into the interpretation of it because Staffan hasn't, and I can't make heads or tails out of it. But the interesting thing is that it reads backwards, right? So it goes from right to left, and all the runes are turned, which is perfectly fine. You know, they could do that. But does that mean something? And you can't see that, but down here, it goes on with a word that and then ends with an M rune. And again, there's interpretation there. I just don't believe much of it, so I'm not going to go into that. But that means that the stone is it actually carved on, just like the Runestone, on the very top. There's nothing up here, but there are 2 runes right there. Either IU or SU. But I think that once we have established some kind of interpretation online for the rest, then it's easier to go into the more difficult parts.
okay. What do we see here?
Yes, this is perhaps the most exciting part of the new interpretation, and here I need a cheat sheet because this is difficult. This is quite damaged, but the reading isn't actually that difficult to establish because there aren't that many possibilities. They haven't painted everything that you can see. And I'm not going to go into the reading. It goes on like this, all the way up here, and then it adds 2 further words. Here it says Makinjaru, and then it says Thunnon. And Staffan Fridell thinks that this is a poem,
Okay.
a verse. And I'm going to read it in Old Norse. Segs no fröje that sigmar heiti maggur eirikis meginjaru thunna. Beautiful, if right. And that would then mean this: it is now said to the Lord that famous for victories shall the king's son be called in the great battle of Dins. Makinjaru means great battle, and Thunna means dins.
Like thin, yeah.
Yeah, and what would the great battle of dins be? Dins meaning sounds or clashes or something.
Could be any battle.
Well, there is one very famous battle, right? The Ragnarök, which is the final battle. And we're going to get into that very soon. So his idea is that the entire stone is raised after Eivisen because his father wanted to commemorate him and to put his death in some kind of perspective. And Staffan Fridell ties this directly into my interpretation of the Runestone. So this is a direct reference, as on the Rökstone, to Ragnarök, the final battle. And then that will lead us to the final and perhaps most exciting side of the Sparlösa stone.
All right. One question about this. We see magur with a full vowel in the end.
That is the correct form, the unsyncopated form, right? But we also have the form sunur, which should have been sunur. Mm-hmm. So obviously this is the very transitional stage where they start thinking, should we skip it or not? Uh-huh. So that would add to the early dating.
And we see some examples of that on Ruk.
Yes, we do. Yeah. Yes, we do. So here we are at the final and perhaps most exciting side. And I should point out that the Rökstone, again, doesn't have any pictures, nor do most early Viking Age runestones. So this is unique in that respect. And we've seen several pictures or figures already. And there hasn't been full interpretation of this very convincing one. I don't think you've seen one, have you?
No.
No. So I felt that I had to contribute something and not only come up with Staffan Fridell stuff. And this is an experiment, but if we start by, this is obviously a building of some kind. Now, what would be the most famous building in all of Norse mythology?
Valhalla.
Valhalla, of course. And if I read from Jason Crawford's translation of Grimnismal, verse or stanza 24, I think Valhalla has 640 doors if they're all counted. 800 einherjar will walk through each when the day comes to fight Fenrir. And it has lots of important information here. First of all, well, it doesn't have 640 doors, but that would be difficult to put in here. The einherjar are, of course, the chosen or elite warriors, exceptional warriors, that they're people who have died in battle, men, good fighters, warriors, and come to Odin in Valhalla, and they spend the days fighting each other, drinking beer at night and so forth, eating pork. And then the next day they're up again and start fighting. But their ultimate purpose is to be there to defend the gods when the final battle, Ragnarök, comes against the giants and Loki, who's a sort of a trickster, sometimes good, sometimes bad, but he comes out bad at the end. And above all, the Fenrir, terrible wolf, that is such a recurrent topic on the Runestone, 4 times in my interpretation. So we start, if this is Valhalla, what could then these birds be? Well, there is a stanza in Völuspá, the very first poem in the Poet Edda, says, near the Aesir, the gods, crows the rooster named Golden Comb. He wakes the men who fight for Odin, lord of battle. But another crows below the earth, a soot-red rooster in the halls of Hel, the goddess of hell. So you have the 2 roosters all together in one stanza. And I'm not sure that they're standing onto the sail of this ship or not, or they're just there. But they look like they're connected with a ship. And is there a ship at Ragnarök? There certainly is. You have the nagelfar, which means the nail fair, because it's made from the nails of dead men's fingers and toes. And that's why you should never throw those away, because that goes into building this terrible ship. And again, in the poem Völuspá, the seer's tale, it says in stanza 48-49, Nagelfar, the giant's ship, is released. That ship sails from the east, bearing giants over the sea, and Loki is its captain. So this is the evil powers attacking the gods, and these roosters are then crowing to sort of at the start of the battle. It's sort of the signal that now the battle starts. So then we come down to these two animals. And again, they have used natural features on the stone surface too. And that may have affected the snout, for example, and the body shape of the animals. Because what would these be? There are no leopards in the Poetic Edda. They look like bobcats or lynx to me, which of course we did have in Sweden at the time. They do have spots, although they're not that big. But the animals that occur at Ragnarök are two wolves. And again, if we read from Grimnismal, stanza 39, Skoll is the name of the wolf who chases the sun till it sets at evening in the woods. Another wolf, Hati, is Hrodvitnir's son. He runs in front of the sun behind the moon. And in other Eddic poems, it's not two wolves, but rather just one, the Fenrir wolf. And in the Vafthrudnismal, stanza 43, it says that he, before the battle starts, he swallows the sun, but kills the sun, but not before she has given birth to a daughter. Because, of course, we have a son, and if Fenrir has killed the old one, there's got to be a new one, and that is his daughter. So this would then rather refer to where two animals kill the sun. Now, why would they look like this instead of wolves? And I can think of three explanations. The first one is that in this part of Sweden, they had another story. It wasn't wolves, it was rather bobcats chasing the sun. Well, iffy, right? Secondly, slightly more credible, they were lousy at depicting animals. There is on the Romsund Great Cliff Face inscription, 14, 15 feet wide, there is what we know is to be an otter, right? Because it's taken from the tail, but it looks like a dog. It has really long legs. So, but could a wolf be carved this bad? I'm not so sure. So the third explanation is, of course, that I'm wrong. It's not a wolf. And this doesn't have any connection with the Ragnarök thing. But I would say this is the main problem with this interpretation. Because if we go down to the final figure here, it's a man riding on a horse. You can see the horse. And he's holding a very prominent sword. And if we read the For Skirnis, where Freyr falls in love with a giantess's daughter, and he sends off Skirnir, his servant, to vow her, and he doesn't make a very good job, so he turns up actually threatening her until she gives in and agrees to marry Freyr. It's a rape story. But before he sets off, he says, Skirnir, the servant, give me a horse that will carry me through darkness and flame, and give me your sword that fights by itself against the enemy giants. And what happens at Ragnarök is that when Freyr encounters the giant, he no longer has a sword, but has to fight him with what is it? An antler, right? Yeah, and that doesn't bode well for him. So he should not have fallen in love with her, because if he had had his sword, he would have defeated the giant and survived. But that adds very well to Skirnir, I think. The problem is that he has what looks like a greyhound here. And again, could that be Fenrir? Well, very poor-looking Fenrir in that case. And the hound itself makes this look more like a hunting season. And I think it's been interpreted like that too. But you don't hunt stuff with a sword, on the other hand.
No. I was thinking too, in Vafthrudnismal, Vidar is getting ready to avenge his father on horseback, it says. So another tie-in with the wolf could be Vidar. And in one of the versions, he does kill the wolf with a sword. In the other one, he kills it by stepping in the jaw of the wolf and ripping the jaws apart. But at least I think there is a consistency here, and except for this, whatever that is, and the unlikelihood of these being wolves, I wish those would have been better carved. And wolves, of course, don't have spots. Or they did in the Viking Age. What do we know? Yeah, sure. Or is it supposed to represent fur, right? Is it supposed to look 3D more so that way? I don't know.
I don't know. But I'm not an art historian. So.
Yeah. Same.
This is my contribution to it. But at least it would tie in with the general Ragnarök theme very well.
I mean, I noticed there were other just curls.
Random
here
curls,
and there.
yes. Yeah.
I think that's a great notion. I mean, of course, how can we prove any of it? But it's a cool way to keep everything together. What do you make of the cross on the sail?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't.
Some
Unless
people
it's
make a lot out of it.
Yes, they would. There has been a Christian interpretation of the stone as well, and then that cross would fit in well.
Yeah.
But crosses are basic symbols, and there were crosses around way before Christianity, and they're used frequently on runestones as just separation marks, including, well, this one has saltire X type, whereas this is a true cross. But why would they put the cross on the sail?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And in particular, right?
Yeah. Perhaps it's just decoration.
Do you want to make any wrap-up remarks about other places on the stone? We also have a question from one member of the audience.
I was thinking about following the natural lines, for the so-called wolves. Could it be laziness or artistic invention? Like, okay, everyone will know this is Fenrir anyway, so I can just make him like this. I was also thinking about the fur. Like these circles could be fur, long fur, the half semicircles and stuff. Could it be just like an artistic interpretation of the natural formations of the rock?
I love it, because that would make it into Fenrir. I'm not sure, of course, perhaps they did improve
A little bit.
the bit, but if you follow this, actually it goes all the way around here in relief, and they didn't usually use relief this early. So perhaps this already had that shape. You can see this leg here, that sort of just peters out, and then the carver doesn't complete the paw here.
Yes.
But that would explain why this is like a bobtail.
That too.
Yeah.
Like you said, shapes and clouds.
Yeah.
That's what suggested itself. Yeah.
Yeah. Although the other one is pretty poor representation. It looks more like the cub.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
It is
And perhaps this is just Fenrir, and that's not another wolf, it's just another animal. Of course, aren't there supposed to be more animals attacking at Ragnarök? Was Fenrir the only wolf?
It depends, right? If you think Garmr is a different canine than Fenrir, then you would have two.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's an otter.
Yes. Typical otter. Yeah. Well, in conclusion, I would just say that I wish more runestones were like this, but also I'm glad that they're all not that difficult to interpret as this one.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for your time today.
It was fun.
And from beautiful Västergötland, we're wishing you all the best.